We're going to close out the afternoon with, frankly, now for something completely different. We talk about the role of women, climate, and development. And I can't think of anyone I would much rather lead that conversation than Amy Christensen. Amy brings to the stage an incredible resume and world in public sector at DOE, doing climate and energy work, Clinton Global Initiative, Google, and now through her own work at Christensen Global Strategies. Please welcome to the stage and the panel, Amy Christensen.
Thank you, Noel. Thanks, Sue. Thank you. Thank you, Joel. Well, earlier today, we heard Joel challenging us to find the big opportunities for impact, whether it's up the supply chain or in our direct operations. And he said to us, look at those 3 R's for addressing risk, enhancing reputation, and driving revenue. And right now we're going to talk about a strategy, a series of tactics that has great bang for the buck, whether it's employee time, resources, financially, to make a difference on sustainability, which is how do we empower women? How do we engage women and girls in the supply chain and otherwise in corporate operations? So 2 fantastic panelists to join us today. We have Heather Grady, who's the Director of Global Philanthropy at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. She previously was head of foundation initiatives at the Rockefeller Foundation, and she has 2 decades of experience working in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East on development and human rights. And then we have Aaron Kramer, who's the CEO of Business for Social Responsibility, who's advising senior executives in BSR's 250-member companies. So great panel for us today. Now, Aaron, I'm going to start with you, because you're the one who wanted to make sure that this issue was addressed today at GreenBiz. Can you tell us why?
Sure, and I hope you'll be glad that we are at the end of the discussion. So it's been a really interesting day here. Congratulations to the GreenBiz team. There's a rich array of examples of great work being done, and it speaks to the growing specialization that exists within the world of sustainability. And one of the reasons why I thought it would be valuable for this topic to be taken on is I sometimes feel as though there's a risk that we specialize our way right out of seeing the bigger picture. And when it comes to climate, it's absolutely clear that we can't solve climate without thinking about economic development and vice versa. And it's equally clear that economic development will either slow down or go into reverse if we don't think more seriously about the role of women in that and the value of investing in women. It's clear, and in fact, this has been recognized by businesses, by development agencies, by the IPCC, that women are and will be disproportionately disadvantaged by climate change. It's equally clear that we can build more social resilience by investing in women and in looking at issues where women are part of the solution, and if not addressed, they tend to take more of the brunt of the problem, things like health, things like housing, things like nutrition. And these are the outcomes that we want to achieve. We want to achieve positive outcomes on these things. That's one of the main reasons why we're addressing climate change. It's so that we can continue to make progress on those key indicators. So in a year when we're talking a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals, where there's a lot of attention on climate, both at a policy level, but of course here with respect to business, I'd love to see us walk away with a greater understanding of how those things are linked and why investing in women is one of the best things that we can all do in order to get the outcomes we want.
Thanks. Heather, how did you come to this issue after a couple decades working on development?
Well, first I just want to thank the organizers for inviting me and how pleased I am to be here. It's my first GreenBiz forum. When I spent all those years working on development at the community level and the national level in a number of countries, it was very obvious how important women's role was in economic development. And if you look at growth of GDP or inclusive economies, whatever way you look at it, a high labor force participation rate by women tends to really fuel that kind of growth and that kind of prosperity. And I lived in both Vietnam and China, and those are just 2 examples that one could cite for this. Also, women at the really poor households need a lot of economic opportunities, because otherwise they can't get into global supply chains. They can't provide a better future for their children. But when I came back to the US, I began working with Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, in an organization called Realizing Rights, the Ethical Globalization Initiative. And we worked on social and economic rights, the right to decent work, the right to health, the right to education. And we had an initiative called Business Leaders Initiative on Human Rights. Now, the International Institute for Environment and Development in London, around the year 2006, invited Mary to speak on the topic of climate change. And they said, this doesn't have much to do with human rights, but we would like you to come and talk about it. And that was about the time when Lord Stern's report came out, citing that climate change would really have an impact economically. We started working on her remarks for that and realized that probably climate change is the greatest threat to human rights that has ever existed. It impacts the right to health because of the spread of disease. Diseases will come to new areas because of changes in temperature. There will be more waterborne diseases because of flooding and no vector control. The right to livelihoods, the right to food with severe disruptions in agriculture and food production, disruptions in supply chains and markets, the very right to life and security, the right to water and shelter. So we began working on it then. And then, of course, we learned what Erin has just mentioned, that the effects on women are disproportionate. Women around the world are usually the caregivers. When someone is sick, when someone cannot travel, women are responsible for taking care of them. Fetching water, fetching firewood. Women are usually the ones who grow crops that aren't irrigated. So when there's a drought, when there's desertification, it really affects women even more than men. So those are some of the effects we saw. Now, when I talk about women as victims of climate change, I never want to leave the impression that they're not fighting back. And there are some amazing examples of women around the world who are on the forefront of addressing climate change. We all know Christiana Figueres, who's the head of the UNFCCC. We know Mary Robinson, who's now the special envoy on climate change for the UN Secretary General. But there are women community leaders around the world as well. I'll just give two quick examples. There's Constance Okolet, a friend of mine who's a farmer in rural Uganda. Uganda used to be a breadbasket. It's a great place to grow crops. The seasons are very predictable. People know when to plant and when to harvest. But with climate change, it's all thrown into disarray. And so there's much more flooding and drought, and so very much more difficult. So Constance has created cooperatives of women farmers to try to address this and somehow create ways to reduce risk and create opportunities, maybe using drought-resistant crops and seeds. Another example is a woman named Ursula Rakova, who lives in the Carteret Islands near Bougainville in Papua New Guinea. Those atolls are being covered as sea level rises, and so she's responsible for resettling her entire community to a new area. But what are they going to do to replace the home gardens that they have as the sea level rises? So they've actually created a cacao cooperative, and now there's a nascent partnership with the Rainforest Alliance to try to make sure that these farmers in their new areas have new ways to earn an income. And I think it's very important that companies that have any opportunities at all to support women's efforts like this start to learn more about them, because I think it is a compelling set of opportunities and compelling stories that maybe can excite your colleagues and consumers.
Absolutely. So Erin, help us identify how companies in the room can tap into this women's leadership, women as solution providers, and help support them, partner with them, create new markets for their goods. How can they engage with women?
Yeah, and we've started out somewhat conceptually, but I would like to bring it back down to the practical things companies can do. And it really starts with three basic things that are absolutely core to what businesses do every day. So job creation is number one. Investment, number two, creation of products and services. So those are really the building blocks of business, and they can, but they don't automatically get undertaken in ways that can create greater resilience inside an enterprise, but also greater social resilience to combat climate. And working with women as a particular and specific lens in terms of defining what companies do are a huge part of the answer. So if you take jobs, Let's talk about supply chains. We've heard lots this afternoon about why the future of sustainability is actually all about supply chains. Well, rather than thinking only about ensuring that people are free from labor violations, what about investing in women's financial literacy? What about investing in women's health? What about looking at, as Levi Strauss does, at women's well-being as a way of thinking about supply chains? And there is a ton of evidence that shows that thinking about your supply chain that way creates more resilience, but it also creates greater efficiency and, frankly, greater profitability through the BSR HER project, on which we've worked with companies like Levi's, like Disney, like Bloomberg. We've seen evidence of as much of as a 4-to-1 payback for each dollar invested in things like this, and it just creates better enterprises within the supply chain. Second is community investment, and if you look at the oil, gas, and mining industries, for example, looking at building local content, these companies spend tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, again, through their value chains. How they invest that money and whether they're able to invest in women-owned enterprises in places where, frankly, that's not much of a tradition quite often, that's another way to build a much more resilient economy. And finally, products and services to build access. So GSK, the pharmaceutical company, a great example, created a new business unit for sub-Saharan Africa and some least developed countries in other parts of the world, where the hurdle rate for investments was deliberately set much lower. And they're able to look at public health, community health issues in new ways that, again, enable women to be in the workforce much more. So these are all things that, again, we've heard the word resilience quite a lot today. These build more resilient societies by making the kinds of investments, building the kinds of products and services, and thinking about jobs in new ways with a particular focus on women.
Is there, I'm just curious, given the two of you and the hats that you wear, do you see partnerships between philanthropy and corporations around engaging women and girls on climate?
Well, one example, actually, your alma mater, the Rockefeller Foundation, has an initiative called Digital Jobs Africa, which has looked at employing women in Africa as part of call centers and other parts of the digital economy value chain, working with a lot of very big tech companies in a way that has, again, created jobs where they didn't exist for people who needed them very, very badly.
And I think that's an example of where a real need for the future is diversifying women and girls' economic opportunities. Again, if communities have been reliant exclusively on agriculture, it's time for them to think about new areas of work. And when we created that at the Rockefeller Foundation, it was saying, agriculture is really important in Africa, but what about digital jobs? They're very prevalent in some countries in Asia, but they've hardly scratched the surface in Africa. So finding ways to connect that. And then I think often foundations and philanthropy can take the first step of investment and try to do some research, do some piloting, some road testing, some proof of concept. Often that's the role of foundations. But it's very important to find the business partners early on so that it's a sustainable activity.
And I think it's a great point, and building new kinds of jobs is crucially important because we're about to face a tsunami of disruption coming from mass automation, artificial intelligence, robotics that may well replace a lot of jobs that have been the first step up the ladder for women in many parts of the world. And technology may be such a game changer that those opportunities won't be as present 10 years from now as they were 10 years ago.
Let me give an example of one thing that might be on the horizon. I don't know if it was discussed earlier today, but the whole question of traceability. There's going to be a lot more accountability for what's in supply chains. And so a lot of people are talking about traceability. Probably some of you know about the Better Cotton Initiative and examples like that where people will be able to say, this cotton or this product was sourced in a sustainable, ethical way. Well, the key to traceability is someone at source, at origin, has to be documenting where that's from. And that also may produce a new kind of local job that we haven't even thought of. But I do think we have to open our minds to what are those opportunities, and crucially, how can women and girls be a part of that so that everyone has an employment opportunity.
We've talked about how they can create greater impact, more bang for the buck as far as making a difference on these issues. But how does it also come back to the company in enhanced revenue, reputation? Can you speak a little bit to that, Aaron?
Well, again, I think value chains are the best example of that. In most companies' value chains, certainly with agriculture, certainly in light manufacturing, turnover rates are astronomical in most places. Productivity is variable, let's say, and that's not a good way to run a business. And so investing in people's livelihoods pays off. Let's take Bangladesh. So Bangladesh is an example of a place where you see both the promise of investment, you see the perils that come along with not doing it the right way in a country that's being hit actually quite hard by climate change. So let's try to maximize the kinds of benefits that we've seen there where per capita GDP has quadrupled over the last 25 years or so. Let's, of course, root out the labor problems, but there's not going to be an industry in Bangladesh if that's not done. So the economic gains for not only the companies that source from there, but the enterprises, the Bangladeshi enterprises that are there, and of course the largely female workforce that's there at a time when climate change is creating a great threat to this country's economy. So I think if you look at just if you build from the bottom up in terms of what these generally small, medium-sized enterprises are doing, they become much stronger, more resilient, and the workers benefit, and the companies that buy from them also have a much more stable and a stable source of supply, and one that is considered legitimate in the eyes of consumers and governments around the world.
Right. Lauren, I wanted to go out to our audience, our virtual audience, our audience here. What are you hearing from folks?
Yeah, definitely. We've had a couple of audience members sort of point out a little bit of a disconnect, which is that ironically, a lot of the businesses and even some of the other large institutions that might be mulling how to get involved in this issue don't have a lot of women in leadership roles. So how might that impact formation of a strategy or execution?
Great question. Either of you want to take that on?
The man or the woman take on that question?
Maybe I'll start. I mean, I think it is very important that we get more women in leadership roles in companies. And I think when women are in leadership roles, it's much more likely that that company, when they're thinking about their CSR initiatives, when they're thinking about their corporate foundation and corporate philanthropy, will not overlook women as a target group or as agents of change. Having said that, there are a lot of amazing male CEOs who have encouraged real strides in their companies. I mean, Coke's, is it 5 by 20, 20 by 5? 5 by 20, Coca-Cola's. And that they don't have a woman CEO, but they're very supportive of strategies like that. So but I do think we should be moving more along the line of more women in leadership positions. I don't know, Aaron, what you think.
Well, I wouldn't give up on half of humanity, the male half, any more than we should give up on the female half. So I think, I think it's the data are so clear. Bill and Melinda Gates, in their annual letter, made this point yet again about the payoff you get from investing in women. And so, I hope men are not blind enough to miss that point.
Absolutely. Actually, I think that Coke initiative, 5 million women entrepreneurs by 2020. Mm-hmm. And then another leader that we've seen in this area is Henri-Francois Pinault, is one of the members of the B team, and I know, Heather, you're an advisor there, and his showing the direct impacts of promoting, empowering women within that operation, which Kering is the parent company to Puma and Stella McCartney and some of the luxury brands. I think you're just starting to see that data building up, that women's leadership and empowerment, even in the direct operations, not just engaging in supply chain, is critical.
Yes, and having a company, a CEO who's committed to that and measuring it and really going out there and talking about it is significant.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, anything else?
Yeah, we are also getting interest, I guess this is encouraging, getting interest in sort of concrete examples of how people might get involved. So mentioned Coca-Cola. We've had people online throw out an example from Walmart, a global women's economic empowerment initiative. Mm-hmm. Any other suggestions for models to look at or organizations to reach out to?
Well, I guess I would mention a couple really great ones in Kenya, and here it comes back to that question of philanthropy's role. I know that these are two that are supported by the Ford Foundation, which has been doing a lot in Kenya to get women more involved in supply chains. So there's a social enterprise called Juhudi Kalimo, which is very good and does work with farmers, and they have a special initiative on women. And there's another one called Farm Africa. And both of them as well address this whole issue of climate change. They are very aware that two critical ways that women have to cope with climate change, women and men farmers, but again, women do a lot of farming around the world, is through drought-tolerant seeds and through water conservation measures. So I think those are two great organizations, and organizations like them exist around the world.
I mean, I think in terms of getting started, it's really as simple as asking the question of how a company can have a positive impact in the communities in which it operates, and ask very specifically what is an angle where we can think about women's needs and the opportunities, market opportunities, not just social opportunities that can be created. There's a history here in the United States where, partly instigated by government action, there's more focus on women and minority-owned businesses in the United States, and that had very, very powerful impacts on enterprise development. So in some ways, it's just as simple thinking about what your value chain spend is, who the workers are in your value chain, what communities you're investing in, and what the opportunities are there. And that's where I think the question of who's sitting around the table when decisions are made is so important. I would hope that men and women are both asking these kinds of questions of their companies, but again, to take Levi's experience, they took a step back and said, how can we have a positive impact on the workers in our supply chain? They looked at worker well-being, but it so happens that the vast majority of workers in their value chain are women, and so you start to ask very specific questions, because in the apparel industry, the majority of workers around the world are women aged 16 to 25 who have a defined set of needs. So it's sort of like, as with so many things in sustainability, it's actually not that different from the rest of business. It's looking at what you're trying to create, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and think and take it on its own terms. And I think answers, as we've seen from a lot of these examples, can come fairly easily.
Absolutely, and I think looking at key sectors for growth, for instance, in the energy sector, you can look at rural electrification, energy access, and the Barefoot College in India is an example where they're training grandmothers and other women to be energy engineers. So they're actually doing the solar installations there, incredibly empowering and educational. I know Heather and I are both Smith College grads. We're always happy to see women trained to be engineers. So I think that there are more and more strategic sectors where we can dive in and find where are those growth opportunities and how do we make sure women are part of that growth as they expand. I think we have time for one more audience question.
The other thing that's coming up as sort of a common thread is asking about different geographies. You talked a little bit about opportunities for digitization in Africa. We've gotten South America has been mentioned, as well as I think India in the Asian markets, but also developed nations like the U.S., thinking about more creative ways to get women involved in economic development. What are some of the best practices you see emerging or promising areas?
I think there's a big difference, less about different geographies and more about different contexts. So I would think about it in terms of urban and rural economies, because the needs, the human capacity base, the infrastructure, they're all different. So I think that is really perhaps the way to think about it. There are some tools that you can use that may apply in both contexts, but in very different ways. So the insurance company AXA has made a big investment in a social enterprise called Leapfrog, which has pioneered microinsurance. So microinsurance can be used in rural contexts for farmers and very often women. It's used in the urban context for people who are trying to start jobs. So same company, same tool, used for a different purpose, needs to be adapted, but I think you could find in India, you would use it, in urban areas in the United States. You'd use it in urban areas in India, and the United States rural as well. It's less about the geography and more about the opportunity that you're trying to create.
So I agree, but I would say gender roles by definition are determined by the local culture and context. So, for example, the differentiated impacts on men and women from climate change differs by culture and context, and women's and men's roles in the economy differ by culture and context, but certainly there are patterns and there are trends. And one of those always is about if women have less access or control over resources. And I think there you do find some similarities across cultures. And those are the things for companies to be aware of.
Absolutely. A last burning question from the audience out there?
It really is. It's, again, kind of encouraging. We're getting just more and more questions about how people can get involved.
And the organizations that they can, I mean, I would just say in the energy space, the UN's been doing Sustainable Energy for All and doing a lot of outreach to corporations and how they can be involved in efficiency, renewables, and access, including with a focus on the role of women within each of those. That's one other. Any other ideas from you all?
Well, if you're interested in women and climate change in particular, I think my ex-boss, Mary Robinson, went back to Ireland and founded the Mary Robinson Foundation for Climate Justice, which has a very strong emphasis on women. And there's a lot of ideas in there about women in the economy.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say that BSR is very happy to help on this. We're working with a lot of our members and want to continue to build this because of the value that it is clearly delivering for companies in the wider world.
It's a great way to end. Please join me in thanking our panelists.